After being reborn, I changed my college preference. Ethan often stayed on campus during weekends, so I locked myself in my room, studying tirelessly. When he brought Emily back home, I moved out. When he decided to attend University B with Emily, I applied to University A instead. In my previous life, before the college entrance exams, Ethan, knowing full well that I hadn't stolen anything, still accused me of being a thief. He did it just to ensure that he and Emily could be together cleanly and honestly. Fine, let them be together. But clean and honest? Did they even deserve such words? Nobody knew I had been reborn. Staring at my mock exam scores, I was on the verge of breaking down. In my past life, just before the college entrance exams, I was falsely accused of stealing Emily's watch. The accusation shattered my mental state, leading to my worst performance ever during the exams and a result far below my usual capability. The first thing I did after being reborn was to change my college preference to University A. My teacher was shocked and asked, "Didn't you always say you wanted to go to the same university as Ethan? Does he know about this?" Hearing Ethan's name, an image of his tall and protective figure flashed through my mind. Everyone always said I was unworthy of him. His family was wealthy, he was good-looking, and he was a model student in the eyes of the teachers. Meanwhile, I was just the daughter of his father's old comrade in arms, someone his family had supported out of loyalty. I smiled faintly and replied, "I don't think that way anymore. I feel University A suits me better now." In my previous life, my mock exam scores consistently surpassed University A's cutoff. But to follow Ethan, I foolishly changed my preference to University B. My sudden decision surprised my teacher, who patted my shoulder approvingly. In that past life, Ethan and Emily orchestrated the accusation against me, claiming I had stolen Emily's watch. Emily had pulled me aside in front of everyone, her face streaked with tears, demanding justice. "Claire, I know my family isn't wealthy, and you look down on me, but this watch was a gift from Ethan. I've been so careful with it. Please, I'm begging you, just return it to me," she said, her voice trembling. Her sobbing grew louder as she collapsed into Ethan's arms. Ethan glared at me and said, "Claire, when you were bullying Emily, did you ever think about your own background? Being poor isn't wrong, but letting poverty breed evil intentions is. Hand over the watch now, and we'll forget this ever happened." The crowd looked at me with disdain, mocking and enjoying the drama. I smiled bitterly. The boy who had once promised to protect me for a lifetime, how had he become like this? My chest felt as if a boulder were crushing it. My heart ached deeply. I hadn't stolen the watch, so how could I return it? They had no concrete evidence against me, so they couldn't do much at that moment. However, I never expected Ethan, who had always been kind to me, to lock me in a room under the pretext of teaching me a lesson while his parents were away. Emily had complained about our public argument, saying it embarrassed her. Ethan told me I had always been able to endure, so a little suffering wouldn't matter. Emily, being delicate, couldn't handle public gossip, he said. That night, the door remained locked. My nerves finally snapped. The next day was the college entrance exam. I pounded on the door and windows, screaming for help, but the only response was my own voice echoing in the vast, empty villa. In despair, I grabbed a glass from the desk and smashed it against the window without hesitation. The shards cut into my flesh, and the pain overwhelmed me. By the faint light of dawn, I sat there, shivering and cold. I endured the pain and somehow managed to complete the 3-day exam, but my mental state was in ruins. I performed worse than ever and ended up at a mediocre university. In the end, I died in a car accident orchestrated by Emily. I hated those two with every fiber of my being. But now, I had been given another chance. I was reborn 3 months before the college entrance exams. This time, I could change everything. Back at Ethan's house, I began packing my things. This villa was a wedding gift from Ethan's parents to him for when he got married. Olivia had always treated me well, but there was no longer any possibility for me and Ethan. The warmth I felt toward Olivia had to be buried deep in my heart. As I packed my belongings, I began drafting a new study plan. My gaze fell on the photograph of my dream university hanging on the wall. Hope filled my heart. As long as I stayed steady and performed well on the exams, I'd soon leave this place behind for good. That evening, I cooked dinner as usual. Ethan came back as expected, with Emily trailing behind him. "Claire," Emily chirped sweetly. "Ethan brought me over again for dinner. You don't mind, do you?" Emily was petite, her oval-shaped face framed by fair skin. She looked especially pure and delicate in her white school uniform. She made herself at home, squealing with delight at the sight of the dishes I had prepared. Without hesitation, she called out for Mrs. Smith, the housekeeper, to serve the food. She got a bowl of porridge. Ethan got one, and Mrs. Smith got one, but none for me. By the time I returned from the bathroom, the three of them were already seated at the table, chatting and laughing like a family. Emily took one bite and immediately spit it out. "I'm allergic to peanuts," she exclaimed, tears welling in her eyes. I leaned against the doorframe, watching Ethan pour her a bowl of soup. He didn't realize until too late that it also had a peanut base. Emily left the house crying, muttering to Ethan as she went, "Claire probably doesn't like me. I won't come back anymore." Ethan escorted her to the door and returned, frowning. I ignored him and sat down to eat. "You did that on purpose," he said, his voice tinged with confusion. Then, as if trying to justify himself, he added, "Emily's family is struggling. I bring her here to have a good meal, just like my family did for you all those years." I didn't reply. Ethan sighed and shook his head, as if conceding defeat. "If you don't like her, I'll take her to a restaurant next time." A week later, Ethan stayed on campus to tutor Emily. Meanwhile, I carried a thick stack of practice exams to the library. In the past, Ethan would stay home and study with me. I'd patiently guide him through each problem. But now, he was focused on helping his new flame prepare for their shared future at University B. As I packed my books, I came across certificates of achievement Ethan and I had earned over the years. I couldn't help but wonder, would he be able to maintain his grades while using study sessions as an excuse for their dates? I decided to take my own certificates, my hard-earned accomplishments, and pack them into my bag. These honors were mine alone, earned through my effort, not thanks to Ethan or his family. I bundled them up and left the villa for the old apartment building where I had grown up. It was far out in the suburbs, but it carried the memories of my childhood. I carefully cleaned my father's military plaque, the one he had received posthumously for his bravery. "Dad," I whispered, "I promise I'll do whatever it takes to achieve my goals." With just over 2 months left until the exams, I could already see freedom on the horizon. After that, I would leave Ethan's family behind forever. Ethan came home late that night. The dinner I had prepared sat untouched. "I ate at school," he explained casually, but the faint scent of gardenias on him told me otherwise. He had eaten with Emily. He probably knew it wouldn't go over well to bring her back, so they ate out before he returned. I silently motioned for Mrs. Smith to clear the dishes and went to my room. The only belongings left in the room were some seasonal clothes and study materials. I packed the clothes into my suitcase, leaving the rest for later. Once Ethan went out on one of his dates next week, I packed the rest of my things. Since I was determined to build a better future, I devoted all my time to studying, while others wasted their days flirting and chatting. I poured every ounce of energy into my review sessions. I was deep into my work when a knock came at the door. I knew it was Ethan. My father had saved his father's life on the battlefield, sacrificing his own in the process. Because of this, Ethan always treated me with a level of respect. He would never enter my room without my permission. "What is it?" I asked, not wanting him to see that I was packing. He hesitated before saying, "The engagement banquet is being prepared. How about the third day after the exams?" In my previous life, our engagement had been arranged according to the wishes of our parents, set to take place right after the college entrance exams. I glanced at my suitcase and replied indifferently, "There's no rush. Let's talk once Olivia gets back." Ethan stood silently outside my door for a long moment before finally walking away. I finally heard Ethan's footsteps fade away, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Resting my head on the desk, I felt a sense of relief. Given Ethan's age, Olivia usually trusted his judgment more. Since I had lost both my parents as a child, Olivia took me in because of the marriage pact our parents had made. To outsiders, I was already considered a part of Ethan's family. and the engagement was just a formality. Besides, Ethan was good-looking, excelled in his studies, and treated me well. It was no secret that my heart had always been his. Everyone could see it. I owed the Johnson family for raising me all these years, but I had paid them back in full, teaching Ethan tirelessly, even in my previous life when he falsely accused me and locked me in a room, ruining my future. That was enough repayment. In this life, I owed them nothing. I was determined to walk my own path. That weekend, to my surprise, Ethan didn't stay on campus. He even brought breakfast. My favorite ate treasure porridge and fried dough sticks. It was something he hadn't done in ages. I scrolled through vocabulary words on my phone as I silently sat down at the table. The only sounds were the occasional clinks of utensils against bowls. "I'll stay home with you to study today," Ethan suddenly said, breaking the silence. I looked at him in surprise and instinctively shook my head. "Don't you want me to keep you company?" he asked, frowning slightly. "You'll just be cooped up in your room all weekend." I was about to find an excuse to decline when the doorbell rang. Emily's voice came through the intercom. "Ethan," she called cheerfully. She stood at the door, holding 2 breakfasts in her hands. As soon as the door opened, she tilted her head up and smiled at Ethan, effectively blocking my view of him. "Why are you here?" "I told you to wait for me," Ethan said, moving slightly to shield her from my gaze. Emily peeked out cautiously from behind his chest. "Sorry, Claire," she said softly. "I was worried he might skip breakfast, so I came to find him." I stared at her face, so innocent and pure, just like in my previous life. No matter what she said, it could always stir Ethan's protective instincts. When Ethan heard that she had been willing to go hungry just to wait for him, he naturally followed her out in a hurry, abandoning his earlier promise to stay. So much for keeping me company. He had planned to meet her all along. I scoffed to myself. At least I didn't have to worry about making up an excuse to pack my things and leave. I pulled out my phone and checked my moving checklist. Wasting no time, I dragged my previously packed clothes and belongings out of the house and called a moving service to take them to my new apartment. Once everything arrived, I organized my things and smiled at the photos of the modest place. "Dad," I whispered, "your daughter can live just fine on her own, without relying on anyone." I spent the entire day at home studying and only returned to Ethan's house in the evening. The intense pace of exam preparation made the days fly by. Late at night, under the glow of streetlights, it was always my shadow bent over books, chasing knowledge. On Friday evening, Olivia and her husband, Mr. Johnson, returned from a business trip. They sat quietly on the living room sofa for a long time before letting out a deep sigh. "Claire," Olivia began earnestly, "he's just close with another classmate, but you and Ethan have been betrothed since childhood. If he dares not marry you, I'll make sure he regrets it. Your parents trusted us to take care of you before they passed away. Besides, your father saved our family. You don't have to worry about anything." When I didn't respond, they exchanged a glance before shaking their heads in exasperation. "You're so stubborn," Olivia finally said with a sigh. "Fine. We'll cancel the engagement banquet." I listened silently as Olivia made the call to cancel the banquet. She informed the event company to withdraw the reservation and refund the deposit. Just like that, the engagement banquet, still in its planning stages, was gone. Letting out a small sigh of relief, I stood up and bowed deeply to both of them. I knew they meant well. By all accounts, Ethan was the model student in everyone's eyes, the perfect son. Even his own parents couldn't understand why I was so insistent on canceling the engagement. But I couldn't explain. I couldn't tell them that in my past life, I was betrayed by those closest to me, stumbled during the college entrance exams, had my entire life turned upside down, and ultimately died in a car accident orchestrated by jealousy and malice. After the engagement was canceled, Olivia and Mr. Johnson told me I would always be their daughter, even without the formal arrangement. I didn't tell them that I planned to leave their family after the exams. For now, I stayed, determined to accompany them through the next 2 months. In the days leading up to the exams, Olivia insisted on driving me to school. As she held my hand tightly, her voice trembled with emotion, urging me to study hard and promising to visit me often. When I unpacked my things at school, I discovered she had slipped a thick wad of cash into my bag. Tears streamed down my face. Olivia must have noticed that my room was slowly being emptied, but she chose not to confront me. Instead, she let me carry out my plans, respecting my decisions like a quiet guardian. I opened my suitcase to retrieve some clothes when I suddenly heard Ethan's voice at the door. Is Emily still upset? I turned to see Ethan standing there. His face visibly startled when he realized it was me. Claire? What are you doing here? He asked. Flustered, I gestured toward the room next door. Your room is over there. That moment, the door to the neighboring room opened, and Emily peeked out. She offered me an awkward smile before retreating back inside. I looked at Ethan. Guilt was written all over his face. After a moment of hesitation, he said, Emily's home situation isn't great, and she lives far from the school. With the exams coming up, I thought it'd be easier for her to stay here since our place is close to campus. I hadn't expected things to progress to the point where they were sharing a roof, and apparently a bed. Ethan seemed to sense my silence. After a pause, he added, Right. Why don't you move your stuff into my room? You can stay there for now. I'll take the floor. As he spoke, he opened the door to his room and looked inside. By the way, what happened to all the books in your room? You used to have so many. I picked up one of my textbooks and pursed my lips. Well, this villa was his. After all, it didn't matter to me where I stayed as long as I wasn't treated as a guest. I've already finished those books. They weren't useful anymore. So I got rid of some of them. I said casually. Ethan frowned. Even if the exams are only 2 days away, you might need those books later. Why would you sell them? I didn't respond, seeing my silence. He added, What about the engagement? What did my parents say? He placed the book back on the desk, and I replied evenly. They said the timing wasn't right. We'll talk about it later. This was the excuse I had agreed upon with Olivia and Mr. Johnson to delay the engagement. Once I moved all my belongings out and settled back into my new home, I planned to have a proper conversation with him about it. Ethan seemed satisfied with the explanation and didn't question it further. He nodded lightly and muttered, All right. If that's the case, then. He stepped out, saying he'd handle moving some things and that I didn't need to worry about it. I looked at the room's nearly empty bookshelves. Only a few martial arts novels we had read together remained. For a moment, I considered returning them to Ethan, but my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter outside. Ethan's voice was deep and calm, Emily's playful and coquettish, and Mrs. Smith's kind and cheerful. The three of them seemed so at ease, as if nothing had changed. I sat back down silently. Sharing a room with Ethan was already inappropriate, even if the engagement hadn't been cancelled. But with the college entrance exams just 2 days away, leaving now would only cause unnecessary drama. Ethan would surely make a fuss. I decided to wait until bedtime to quietly set up a spot for myself on the living room couch. After studying all day, I wanted to sleep early. However, Emily, full of energy, was lounging in the living room in a camisole nightgown, pulling Ethan aside to help her with her questions. Ethan glanced at me briefly before coaxing her upstairs. Yet their laughter and conversation carried through the walls, as if intentionally loud enough for me to hear. Feeling suffocated, I stepped outside for some fresh air. Claire, why are you out here in the middle of the night? Aren't the exams soon? You'll catch a cold, called the neighbor from her window, her concern genuine. The house was stifling. I replied with a small smile. The neighbor, whose husband worked in real estate, had a comfortable life. She often brought me little souvenirs from her trips abroad, treating me kindly. She leaned over the balcony, her tone exasperated. That Ethan, I swear, he seemed so devoted. But look at him now, bringing some other girl into the house right before your big exams. And you, why don't you put him in his place? You're too nice. The two of you are practically engaged. But you're letting this slide? If you let him get away with it now, he'll think he can walk all over you in the future. She continued her tirade, but I only half listened. Apparently, Ethan had told everyone that I had suggested bringing Emily home because of her poor family circumstances and long commute, claiming I wanted to help her focus on studying. I laughed to myself, bitterly. Clearly, Ethan was just trying to save face, using me as a shield to fend off criticism. But since I was planning to leave soon, I didn't want to waste energy on meaningless arguments. I nodded politely and said nothing. The next morning, I left for school early. The neighbor saw me off, urging me again to talk some sense into Ethan. I just smiled and waved goodbye. When I arrived at the classroom, there weren't many students yet. I took out my notebook of mistakes and reviewed a few questions. But then, I noticed something that didn't belong to me. A shiny, conspicuous watch placed in plain sight. Pushing my books to the corner of the desk. "Ah, Ethan, my watch is gone." Emily's panicked voice rang out as she frantically searched her bag, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That watch was worth nearly $10,000. I held the watch in my hand, intending to return it, but the moment Emily saw it, a glint flashed in her eyes. She suddenly lunged toward me, slapping my hand hard. The watch flew out and landed on the floor with a clatter, drawing everyone's attention. The murmurs began immediately. "Isn't Claire the one raised by Ethan's family? How could she steal someone else's things? Even if she dreams of marrying rich, a dog's nature can't change." Emily's voice, soft and tearful, chimed in. "Ethan, there must be some misunderstanding. Claire must have her reasons." Her tone was so innocent, so considerate, just as I remembered from my past life. She always appeared harmless, but her words twisted the truth and planted doubt in others' minds. Ethan frowned deeply. "Claire, do you know that stealing is a crime? You could go to jail for this." Emily's friends quickly chimed in. "Emily, why are you defending her? Someone like that probably has their eyes on more than just your watch. And to pull this right before the exams, she must be trying to mess with you on purpose." Another student added with disdain. "She's just jealous that Emily and Ethan are close. But that doesn't excuse breaking the law. She could ruin her entire future." More voices joined in. "You never really know people, do you? We should just call the police." I stood silently amidst the accusations, the chaos swirling around me, feeling the all-too-familiar sting of betrayal. I picked up the shattered glass-covered watch and said, "Sure, call the police. After all, the only person who really knows how this watch ended up in my drawer is the one responsible. Barefoot doesn't fear wearing shoes," I thought. Sure enough, Emily's face turned pale as she clung tightly to Ethan's sleeve. No, don't call the police," she stammered. "That wouldn't be good for Claire. She's about to take her exams too." Her friends, however, weren't so kind. "Emily, you're too soft-hearted," one of them said. "People like her will just take advantage of your kindness." Soft-hearted? I let out a bitter laugh, then suddenly raised my hand and slapped Emily across the face. The sharp sound echoed in the room, leaving her stunned and speechless. "Pathetic, aren't you? Emily, do you really not know what you've done? Do you need me to air out all your dirty deeds for you to feel satisfied?" Ethan, seeing her cheek rapidly swell, immediately pulled her into his arms. "Claire, what's wrong with you? Have you lost your mind?" "Lost my mind?" I laughed bitterly. "That's Rich. She's the one accusing me of theft right before the most important exam of my life. You want the truth? Check the security cameras. They'll tell you everything." A few students, who had remained neutral, began to speak up. "Yeah, let's just check the cameras. That'll clear everything up." Ethan's expression darkened, but he muttered, "Claire, there's no need to deny it. I can pay for the watch." I took a step back and sneered. "You think I did it? Ethan, you've known me for years. Do you really believe I'm that kind of person?" He hesitated, his fingers twitching slightly as if reconsidering his assumptions. But then, the notice came back. The security cameras had conveniently been out of order. I had no way to prove my innocence, and the watch ended up being handed over to the principal. The teacher, aware of the watch's high value, called me into the office. Ethan suddenly appeared and declared, "Emily said she won't press charges." The Johnson family's wealth and influence were undeniable. Even the principal couldn't ignore Ethan's words. The teacher looked troubled but had no choice but to return the watch. Emily, of course, put on another performance, crying dramatically for over an hour while Ethan comforted her. He seemed entirely absorbed in her tears, paying no attention to anyone else. Later that evening, Ethan came to find me. "Claire," he began, his tone suggesting he wanted to argue. I sat down, waiting for him to speak. He hesitated, his face stiff and uncomfortable. "I'll sleep on the couch tonight," he finally said. I stayed silent. He paused again, clearly unable to hold back what he really wanted to say. "Emily is upset," he continued. "She cried all afternoon. Couldn't you have just let her be? It's only a couple of days until the exams. Do you really have to be so petty?" I let out a cold laugh, which seemed to catch him off guard. He probably expected me to get angry, maybe even start defending myself. Instead, my calmness seemed to annoy him more. "Fine," I said, smiling faintly. "Whatever you say." This unexpected response made him falter. For a moment, he seemed unsettled, as if something was slipping out of his control. In my past life, I had trailed after Ethan like a shadow, laughing only when he laughed, afraid to cry if he was displeased. Looking back, I felt like a fool. In this life, I knew better. I would keep my distance. Ethan clearly hadn't expected my easy agreement. His expression flickered with a hint of panic, as if he could sense that something was slipping away but couldn't grasp it. The next day, I returned to my old apartment a day earlier than planned. I took all my personal documents with me, just in case. That night, I sat at my desk, reviewing my mistake book. Halfway through, I heard a knock at the door. Thinking it was my neighbor, I opened it without much thought. Standing there was Ethan, wearing only a t-shirt. His face pale and his hair disheveled, as if he'd been exposed to the cold night wind. My first thought was that Ethan still wasn't willing to let me go. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional cry of a stray cat echoing in the darkness. Ethan stared at me intently, his eyes drilling into mine as if he were searching for answers or trying to break through my resolve. "Come home with me," Ethan said, his voice unusually soft. I looked at him calmly and replied, "This is my home." He reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I took a step back to avoid him. "Claire, don't be mad. Please, just come home with me," he said. Ethan lifted one foot, as if about to step inside and help me with something, but I quickly pushed the door half closed. His gaze landed on the items sitting on the edge of my living room table, and his expression immediately shifted. "What are those?" I froze for a moment. They were the things I had packed up and brought back from the Johnsons' house. Old books I planned to sell. Ethan's face grew tense, his expression a mix of confusion and anger. "You've kept them in such good condition. You've always been careful with your belongings," he muttered, as if talking to himself. I sighed, but my grip on the door handle remained firm. Ethan frowned. "You're still upset. Emily was in a hurry and misunderstood you, but she really loves that watch. She's always respected you, and she cares about you. She even urged me to come find you today. But you're always so." He trailed off when he noticed the way I was looking at him, distant, as if he were a stranger. His mouth moved as if to say more, but the words never came out. I laughed dryly. "Respect? Respect is not getting cozy with someone else when you know your engagement is coming up. Respect is not letting her sleep in your bed while you're still with someone else." Ethan's face cracked, his expression wavering between disbelief and defensiveness. "What cozy? I just feel sorry for her. Her family situation isn't good, so I'm just helping her out a bit more." "Helping her?" I scoffed. "Does helping include sharing a bed? When did giving every girl you feel sorry for a home become your life's mission?" His face turned pale, his composure visibly shaken. "Claire, you're angry right now. Let's calm down. Tomorrow, the driver will come to pick you up," he said hastily before turning and stumbling out of the apartment. I watched him leave, listening to his hurried, uneven footsteps fading down the stairs. Smiling faintly, I closed the door. It's funny how extreme anger can make you laugh. How could I have been so blind in my past life, chasing after someone so alien to me? Determined to avoid a repeat of my past, I focused all my energy on studying, staying at home and keeping to myself. Ethan didn't try to find me again. One evening, as I was reviewing mistake explanations, I heard a faint rustling outside my door. Curious, I turned the handle to check, but the clinking sound of a chain suddenly echoed. I realized I'd been locked in with an iron chain. I couldn't believe Emily had the audacity to pull such a stunt, even in a different setting. Without hesitation, I picked up my phone. The next morning, our class gathered outside, preparing to enter the exam hall. Emily was smiling brightly, her mood unusually cheerful. "Don't worry, Claire won't be late," she said with a smug confidence. Ethan, standing beside her, gently patted her head. "Good luck on your exams." Emily, looking into her doe-like eyes, his expression softened. But then, he seemed to recall the cold, detached look I had given him the other day. A trace of unease flickered across his face, an emotion he couldn't quite shake off. As the teacher ushered the students into the exam hall, my absence became apparent. Emily's smile widened, her heart bubbling with joy like an open can of soda. She could already imagine I wouldn't show up. Joy bubbled up within Emily as she beamed with satisfaction. After the final exam, reporters caught up with Jason He, the perennial runner-up in the grade rankings. For an interview, the host asked, "You're the first student we've interviewed. Was this exam difficult for you?" Jason smiled confidently at the camera. "It was manageable." Emily, who was walking behind him, chimed in with a sweet smile. "Jason, this time you'll finally be first in the grade rankings." Jason's expression darkened, his usual politeness cracking. "Don't set me up for failure." "Emily," he said sharply, his tone making her flinch. Emily scrambled to explain. "But Claire didn't even show up for the exams. If you're not first, then who else could be?" Jason didn't bother responding to her. From the day the exams began, I hadn't stepped foot back into the Johnsons' home. The next time I saw Ethan was just before the celebration banquet. Emily, clinging to Ethan's arm with a radiant smile, walked in with him. The moment Ethan saw me, he instinctively shook her hand off. Though his mood seemed off, he quickly recovered and smiled at me. "Claire, it's okay if the exams didn't go well. You can always repeat the year. My cousin runs a fantastic preparatory class. The resources are excellent. I can recommend you join. With your previous performance, you'd surely get into University B next year, and even be our junior." I pressed my lips together lightly and said, "Such a great opportunity. Why not save it for yourself?" Emily's friends immediately jumped in, bristling with indignation. "Claire, don't be so ungrateful. Emily's just thinking about what's best for you. Plenty of people take an extra year to study and improve. Don't throw away your future just because of your pride." Their fake sincerity was so blatant it was laughable. Jason happened to walk in at that moment and overheard their remarks. With a disdainful glance, he said, "Emily, you and your pack of dogs are barking nonsense again? On the day of the exams, you were cursing someone to fail. Now you're shamelessly suggesting a top student retake the year? Your audacity is incredible. Want me to give you an award for it?" Emily's face turned pale. She glanced at Ethan, clearly hoping for support. Ethan frowned, seemingly displeased with Jason's mocking tone, and took a step closer to me. "Even if you didn't take the exam, just come home," Ethan said. "Even if you don't go to college, my family can still take care of you." And that's when I understood. No matter how outrageous Emily was, Ethan would always justify it. To him, her actions were excused by her difficult upbringing, and others were expected to accommodate her. Something inside me snapped. Without warning, I slapped Ethan across the face. The sharp sound silenced everyone. Emily froze mid-cry, the tears in her eyes vanishing in shock as she stepped protectively in front of Ethan. "Why did you hit him? Are you crazy?" she shouted, raising her hand to slap me in return. Before her hand could land, Jason grabbed her wrist and shoved her hard, causing her to stumble into Ethan's arms. "I've seen enough. A little discipline won't hurt," Jason said coldly, his smile more like a sneer as he looked at the two of them like they were a ridiculous spectacle. Ethan's expression darkened as he walked over to me, grabbing my wrist tightly. "You're coming with me today. We need to settle this once and for all." Pain shot through my arm, and I stumbled forward, nearly crashing into him. I instinctively prepared to kick him, but Jason was quicker. His fist connected with Ethan's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Jason stepped protectively in front of me, shielding me with his arm. "Are you blind? She doesn't want to go with you. Then back off. Go to the hospital and get your eyes checked," Jason said, his voice calm but laced with warning. Ethan clutched his reddened jaw, his face a mix of anger and frustration. His glare bore into me as if trying to suppress the storm brewing inside him. Emily quickly jumped in to diffuse the tension. "Ethan, don't fight over someone like her. It's not worth it," she said, desperately tugging at his arm. Few classmates, having arrived early, began to notice the commotion and turned to watch. Ethan's expression shifted multiple times, his chest rising and falling with restrained emotions. Finally, he turned to me and said in a low, deliberate voice, "Claire, I'm so disappointed in you," I said to Ethan. After everyone left, I stood there for a moment, calming my emotions. Jason looked at me, a trace of concern on his face. I shook my head. "It's just that I didn't get the chance to kick him earlier. You beat me to it. Such a shame." Jason fell silent for a moment, then burst into hearty laughter. "You. Haha. I really didn't expect that." I didn't attend the celebration banquet in the end. Jason, noticing my reluctance to deal with Ethan and Emily, suggested we go to the riverside to watch the fireworks instead. Parents celebrating the end of exams had bought fireworks, and we spent 3 hours watching the colorful bursts light up the cold night sky. As the final pieces fell, glittering and fading, the night grew quiet. Jason turned to me, his profile sharp in the dim light, and leaned down to whisper near my ear, "Why not consider someone else for a change?" I stayed silent, pretending not to hear. Right now, my plans for the future didn't include love. My heart was void of men. I believed I needed solitude to grow stronger. The day the results were released, gossip spread like wildfire among the students. Emily had been taken away by the police right after checking her scores. Pictures of her being escorted into a police car flooded every group chat. At the same time, news of my being ranked first in the grade spread just as quickly. Some classmates from my exam hall came forward. "I told you. I saw someone sitting in her seat. You all insisted she didn't take the test." "Yeah, I saw her too." Another chimed in. "She took the test and even got into University A. I feel so proud to say I'm in the same class as Claire. It's a dream come true." The tide of public opinion shifted rapidly. Videos of Emily boasting to the host about Jason becoming the top-ranked student resurfaced and were now ridiculed online. The backlash was swift and merciless. After being bailed out by Ethan's family money, Emily discovered the tables had turned completely in my favor. Pale with rage, she fainted upon seeing a screenshot of my top-ranking scores and had to be hospitalized. On the eve of the exams, Emily had locked me in my old apartment building under the guise of trying to convince me. She had manipulated Ethan into giving her my address, all to disrupt my focus. I hadn't made a scene about it then. Instead, I quietly filmed her from the window, ensuring I had proof. I waited for this moment, when she would soar to imagined heights, only to plummet back down to reality. In this second chance at life, I couldn't let her actions go unpunished. Once in college, I juggled part-time work with my studies, consistently ranking at the top of my class. I occasionally heard rumors about Emily and Ethan breaking up. Apparently, during a conversation with her friends, Emily had accidentally let slip details about the watch and locking me in the room. Ethan overheard everything. He had been shocked. His perception of Emily completely shattered. He confronted her, demanding to know why she had pretended to be innocent all these years while blaming everything on me. For years, he had believed I was petty and mean-spirited, a bully. The stark contrast between what he had thought and the truth made him question his own judgment. By the time Ethan realized he had been wrong about everything, it was winter. Emily cried and begged him for 2 months, but all she got in return was a large breakup settlement and a curt, "Don't let me see you again." That was Ethan, always so self-centered, placing himself above everyone else. Meanwhile, Jason, who had also gotten into University A, kept subtly making his presence known. He'd sit beside me in class, join me for meals, or wait outside my classroom after exams. Today, there were fireworks near the river 5 kilometers from campus. Jason had invited me, and I agreed. It was time to address the dynamic between us and give our relationship some clarity as the year ended. I wore my winter coat and buried my face in a thick beige scarf. At the campus gate, I unexpectedly saw Ethan. His face was pale from the cold, and he looked haggard, as if he'd been waiting for a long time. The moment he recognized me, he rushed over and pulled me into a tight embrace. I struggled, pounding on his chest, but he didn't let go. He held the back of my head, his voice urgent as he said, "Claire, I know you're angry at me," Ethan said, his voice heavy with regret, "but I'm actually glad, because it means you still care." I didn't answer. Instead, I lifted my knee and drove it straight into his stomach, pushing him away. "Go home, Ethan. Stop acting crazy." Just as I finished speaking, Jason arrived, catching sight of the scene. Without hesitation, he shoved Ethan aside and instinctively stood protectively in front of me. "Haven't you had enough of haunting her like a ghost?" Jason snapped. Ethan's expression darkened as his anger flared. Seeing Jason reminded him of the scene before the celebration banquet, and the memory only fueled his rage. "Jason," Ethan growled, "are you coveting what's mine?" He raised his fist as if to strike. I stepped forward and cut him off before he could go any further. "Ethan, we have nothing to do with each other anymore." Hearing me call his name, Ethan froze, his aggressive posture faltering. "Claire," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. If I had known you were going to call off the engagement, I never would have let you leave. I would have stayed by your side. I misunderstood you. I realize that now. Let's start over. Please." I let out a cold laugh. "No, Ethan. Jason. Let's go." Without hesitation, I reached for Jason's hand, and he responded by gripping mine tightly. Ethan stood there, stunned, as we walked away, his figure growing smaller in the distance. Left alone in the biting wind, he watched us, his face filled with disbelief. By the bridge, the cold wind swirled around us as vibrant colors from the fireworks danced across Jason's sharp profile. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Claire, does this mean what I think it means?" I couldn't help but laugh softly. I had been waiting for him to ask that. Opening my mouth to respond, I was interrupted as Jason gently placed his warm hand over my lips. "Sure, let me speak first," he said, his voice low and tender. His star-like eyes locked onto mine as he began. "Claire, for 3 years, you've always been ahead of me, whether in rankings, in the dining hall, or even in my thoughts. I've watched you eat, study, and tackle exams with that serious focus of yours. First, I thought it was admiration, but then I realized I'm a hopeless romantic, and I'm hopelessly in love with you." He looked up at the sky, his nose slightly red from the cold. As he continued, "I used to stand back, watching you cry, smile, and hurt, all for Ethan. It made me feel like a terrible person, lurking on the sidelines, hoping for a chance that seemed impossible. Then Emily showed up, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again." He smiled wryly. "I could tell you this story 100 times if you'd let me. I know you're scared of love. Scared it'll distract you from your goals. You always say your heart has no place for men because you need your strength to wield your sword." Jason took a deep breath, his hand clenched at his side. "Well, how about this? I'll wield the sword for you. Will you let me?" I stared at him, caught off guard. Could it really be this simple? Slowly, I took off my warm gloves, placing my hand in his. "Then the job is yours," I said, smiling. "Boyfriend." His previously composed face lit up with vivid emotion. "Claire, Claire, Claire," he repeated, his voice full of joy. "My girlfriend." In 1980, I dropped out of school and started working to support my fiancé, Ryan Miller. Through college, I also took care of his mother and younger brother. During the day, I sold goods at a street stall, and at night, I worked tirelessly sewing. My eyesight deteriorated, and my fingers grew rough with thick calluses. I thought my sacrifices would mean something, that he would appreciate me, graduate, and marry me as he had promised. But instead, he betrayed me. He had already been involved with another woman, Emma Carter, and they even had a child together. When I found out, Ryan showed no remorse. Instead, he and Emma conspired against me, stole everything I had, and ultimately killed me. I was left with nothing. No money, no justice, no dignity. They buried me in a shallow grave on the hill behind our village, while they went on to live a prosperous life in the city, complete with luxury cars. a high-rise apartment, and a successful career. But fate was kind to me. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back to the day before I had dropped out of school. Ryan was there, pleading with me to give up my chance to take the college entrance exam so I could work and pay for his education instead. This time, I didn't hesitate. I slapped him hard across the face, twice, and announced the end of our engagement. I swore to live my life for myself, free from anyone's control. Sarah, you don't need to take the college entrance exams. Ryan insisted, feigning concern. You should focus on earning money. If we both go to college, how will we pay for the tuition? You know our families can't afford it. Exactly, Sarah. Emma chimed in. College doesn't really help women. What matters is supporting the family. You should give all the money to Ryan. Once he's successful, he'll make sure you live a good life. I blinked, staring at the two people before me. Ryan, my so-called fiancé, and Emma, my so-called friend, who had also been the mistress in my previous life. In my last life, I had been a top student, fully capable of getting into a prestigious university and starting a new chapter in life. But I gave it all up for Ryan. I worked tirelessly, sacrificing everything for him. During the day, I sold goods, and at night, I sewed until my hands bled, all to support his education. I even took care of his mother and younger brother, cooking, cleaning, and doing laundry for them. They were lazy and wasteful, treating me like a free maid. Yet I endured it all because I loved Ryan and saw his family as my own. After years of hardship, Ryan finally graduated from college and landed a decent job. I thought my sacrifices were finally paying off, that he would keep his promise and marry me. But I was wrong. The first thing he did upon returning home was to call off our engagement and announce his plans to marry Emma. That was when I learned the truth. Ryan and Emma had been secretly involved for years. Even before college, they had already planned to attend the same university and live together while I funded their education and expenses. I was completely in the dark, naive enough to believe their lies. While I toiled day and night to make money, not only Ryan but Emma, too, spent the fruits of my labor. Both of their families were poor and couldn't afford tuition or living expenses. But with my sacrifices, they graduated and began successful lives. Now they were preparing to leave the village with their entire families, heading for the city to start anew. Meanwhile, I was left with nothing. My years of sacrifice unnoticed, my love unreciprocated. Even Ryan's mother and brother, whom I had cared for as if they were my own family, treated me as if I were unworthy, a mere high school dropout undeserving of a college graduate. When I confronted Ryan, crying and asking why he betrayed me, he accused me of being loud and damaging his reputation. He and Emma then plotted my death, stealing what little I had left. While they thrived in the city, I was buried in a nameless grave. But this time, things will be different. Heaven has given me a second chance. I was reborn, and it just so happened to be on the most critical day of my life. The day when I had been persuaded to drop out of school and give up the college entrance exams. I looked up at Ryan Miller. In my previous life, I had been infatuated with him, blindly trusting his words without question and willingly sacrificing everything for him. Even though we were only engaged, I had already treated him as the most important person in my life. But now, as I gazed at him, I felt nothing but disgust. Seeing me remain silent, Ryan grew impatient. Well, can't you just give me a straight answer? Don't worry. Once I graduate from college, I'll make sure to marry you in style. Ryan Miller, always keep my word. Hearing his last sentence, I couldn't hold back a laugh. Always keep your word, I scoffed. How bold of him to say that with a straight face. In my previous life, I had been so blinded by love that I actually believed his lies. Sarah, I'm talking to you. What are you laughing at? Ryan snapped, his face twisting in anger. He rolled up his sleeves, ready to hit me. Yes, Ryan wasn't just an ungrateful, deceitful man. He was also an abuser. In my previous life, if I disobeyed him, he would hit me. Afterward, he'd cry and beg for forgiveness, slapping himself and kneeling before me, promising to change. Afraid of losing him, I forgave him every time. But now, I didn't love him anymore. I wasn't afraid of him and certainly wouldn't let myself be manipulated by his pathetic tactics. If slapping someone was inevitable, I figured I might as well get it over with myself. I stepped forward and delivered 2 sharp slaps across his face. The loud smack echoed through the air, leaving everyone stunned. Emma Carter, startled by my sudden action, let out a scream and covered her mouth. Once she processed what had happened, she rushed to Ryan's side to check his face, practically crying in distress. Her scream attracted the attention of several passing villagers, who quickly gathered around to watch the commotion. Ryan held his now burning cheek, staring at me in disbelief as he shouted, "Sarah, have you lost your mind? How dare you hit me?" Emma pointed her trembling finger at me, her voice shrill. "Sarah, what do you think you're doing? Ryan is your fiancé. How could you slap him like that?" I let out a cold laugh. "My fiancé? You still remember that? Huh, the way you're defending him so fiercely. I thought he was your fiancé." The onlookers, intrigued, formed a circle around us, seeing the growing audience. Emma's eyes darted around before she suddenly started crying dramatically. "Sarah, I've put up with you bullying me because Ryan always protected you, and I understood. But now you've gone too far. Hitting Ryan like this. I only said a few words of advice, and you're already accusing me of things I didn't do and ruining my reputation. I never expected you to be this kind of person." Ryan quickly joined in, pointing an accusing finger at me. "I really misjudged you, Sarah. I thought I'd work hard, make a fortune, and marry you in style so you'd never have to worry about anything again. But now I see what kind of venomous woman you are." The villagers, unaware of the full story, saw Ryan and Emma's synchronized performance and naturally assumed I was in the wrong. "What's going on here? Isn't that old Cheng's daughter? Why is she hitting people? And her fiancé, too. How could she dare lay a hand on him? Poor Ryan, working so hard to get ahead. And Emma, what a kind soul, putting up with so much. Sarah's completely out of line. Ever since old Chung passed away, that girl's been out of control. A young woman without a man to keep her in line? This is what happens. She's hitting Ryan now, and Emma's no exception. What a disgrace." Hearing the villagers' comments, Emma cried even harder, playing her role to perfection. I couldn't help but laugh at their ridiculous display. Their pitiful act as if they'd been wronged in the worst possible way. These two despicable people really were cut from the same cloth. Since they loved playing the victim and manipulating public opinion from a moral high ground, I decided to give them a taste of their own medicine. Without hesitation, I rolled up my sleeves and looked at Ryan Miller with tear-filled eyes, my expression one of deep grievance. "Ryan," I began, my voice trembling, "how could you be so ungrateful? I gave you money, cared for your family, all because I loved you. Even though you often hit me, I endured it all without complaint. But just because I was scared and reflexively hit back once today, you're now rallying everyone to scold me." My arms were covered in bruises and scratches, injuries I'd gotten a few days ago while working. Some of the marks had scabbed over, but they were still visible enough to serve my purpose perfectly today. The crowd immediately froze in shock. "What? Ryan hits women? A man who beats women isn't a man at all," someone exclaimed. "Regardless of the situation, hitting a woman is unacceptable," another villager muttered angrily. "I can't believe I ever trusted this scumbag," someone else chimed in. Ryan and Emma Carter both stared at me in disbelief. I wiped away a tear and pressed on. "Ryan, after all these years, was I not good enough for you? Or have you simply grown tired of me? Oh, I see. It must be because Emma is so outstanding and beautiful, and she has feelings for you. It's only natural for you to fall for her." Emma's face turned bright red. She glanced shyly at Ryan, nervously twiddling her fingers. "That's not true. Ryan, don't misunderstand me," she stammered. Ryan's face turned a sickly shade of green, pointing a trembling finger at me. He shouted, You venomous woman. Stop making baseless accusations." I took a couple of steps back, then fell to the ground in a dramatic show of despair. Tears streamed down my face as I wailed, "Fine, Ryan, I understand now. Since you've grown tired of me, let's end this cleanly. Let's call off the engagement and go our separate ways. From now on, we'll be strangers." My performance was so convincing that the villagers were visibly moved. "So that's the truth? I really misunderstood her." One muttered, "Ryan's an absolute disgrace. Calling off the engagement is the right choice. Another declared. It's just an engagement, not a marriage. It's not too late to back out. Someone added. She's still young. She can find someone much better. Another villager reassured. Within minutes, the tide of public opinion shifted entirely. The same people who had been criticizing me moments ago were now rolling up their sleeves, pointing fingers at Ryan, their eyes filled with contempt. Ryan stood frozen, utterly stunned. He couldn't comprehend how the situation had spiraled out of his control so quickly. When he tried to speak, the villagers drowned him out with an onslaught of scolding and insults. Beads of sweat dripped down his forehead as he struggled to defend himself, but it was no use. He could only glare at me with a dark expression. Sarah, are you serious about this? He finally hissed through gritted teeth. If you really want to call off the engagement, then fine, I'll do it. But don't come crying to me later when you regret it. I rose to my feet slowly, my voice resolute. I'm absolutely serious. Ryan, I'll never regret this decision. In this second chance at life, there was no way I'd repeat the mistakes of my past. Ryan's face twisted in anger as he spat. Fine. Then let's break off the engagement. But mark my words. When I make it big and become rich, don't you dare come crawling back, begging me to marry you. I shook my head and sighed. Look at him. This man was so ordinary yet so self-assured. In my past life, without my financial support and the care I provided for his burdensome family, he wouldn't have even made it through college. What was he dreaming about with his talk of making it big and earning lots of money? From the look on his face and the tone of his voice, he clearly still believed I was just throwing a tantrum. It was laughable. Truly, thinking back, it was obvious that he had wanted to break off the engagement long before. The only reason he hadn't was because I willingly worked and sacrificed to support his education. He waited until after graduation, once he had been assigned a stable job and no longer needed me, to kick me to the curb. He had been so confident that I couldn't live without him, that he was indispensable to me, but I was no longer the person I used to be. I replied calmly, Don't worry. I won't regret it. Just make sure you don't come begging me later. Ryan scoffed, spitting on the ground. Beg you? Ha! Over my dead body. You, a worthless, uncultured farm woman? I'd rather bash my head against a wall and die. Several older women nearby were immediately offended, pointing their fingers at him. They scolded him fiercely. What's wrong with a farm woman? Didn't a farm woman raise you two? And now you have the nerve to look down on them? You ungrateful brat. Get out of our village as soon as you can. More and more villagers gathered, their voices full of condemnation. Ryan couldn't withstand the mounting insults. Flushed with embarrassment, he turned to leave, dragging Emma Carter along with him. But I wasn't done yet. Wait a minute, called out, stopping him just as he was about to step out of the crowd. Hearing me, he paused mid-step and turned back with an arrogant smirk. Oh, so now you're admitting you were wrong? Well, it's too late. But if you truly repent, I might forgive you. All you have to do is praise me in front of everyone here. Hand me $300 and buy some new clothes for my little brother. Then we can forget all about this. I almost burst out laughing. Holding out my hand, I raised my voice and said, Since we've broken off the engagement, there's no reason for me to tolerate your behavior anymore. How about you repay the money you've borrowed from me? It's only fair to settle your debts, isn't it? Ryan's face turned red with anger. What are you talking about? When did I ever borrow money from you? I started listing them off one by one. May of '77. You said you needed $20 to treat your friends to dinner. June of '77. You said you needed $15 to buy new clothes because yours were torn. Then, before I could finish, he interrupted me with a string of curses. You lying witch. Stop spewing nonsense. If you've got proof, show me the IOUs. Otherwise, don't you dare say I owe you anything. All that money was what you gave me willingly, not a loan. Get it straight. The crowd erupted in shock. So Ryan's been freeloading off her all this time? Someone murmured. How shameless. Asking for money and not even leaving an IOU. Then treating her like this? Unbelievable. She worked so hard to support him, and he didn't even appreciate her. What a disgrace. Even the villagers who had defended Ryan earlier were now silent. retreating into the crowd and pretending they hadn't spoken. Finally, Ryan snapped, his face red with fury. He shouted, "Enough!" His eyes darted around desperately, as though searching for an escape. Glaring at me with seething hatred, he growled, "Are you serious about wanting me to repay you?" I nodded firmly. Of course. Why wouldn't I? The money he owed me added up to about $200. A substantial sum in these times. It was money I had scrimped and saved through hard work, sacrificing my own needs. I wasn't about to let him walk away with it. How could I let him walk away with my money without paying it back? After all, no one's money grows on trees. It's only right to get it back. The villagers around me began chiming in with support. That's right. Sarah, you should get your money back. Ryan, if you're a real man, pay her what you owe. At least leave with a shred of dignity. One of them said sternly. Voices from the crowd rose in agreement, putting immense pressure on Ryan. With gritted teeth and his face turning red from anger, he reluctantly agreed. Fine, I'll pay you back. Just wait for it. Emma Carter, however, wasn't pleased. In her usual sneering tone, she interjected. Sarah, it's just a couple of $100. Is it really worth being so calculating over? You and Ryan have known each other for so long. Is there any need to be this petty? Her words sparked a thought, and I turned to her with tears in my eyes, feigning hurt. Yes, I am petty. I'm nothing compared to you. Emma, you must be so much more generous, considering how you've been spending my hard-earned money while clinging to Ryan every day. Since you love him so much, why don't you help him pay off his debt to me? My words were like a bombshell, instantly detonating in the crowd. In this conservative community, moral purity was held in high regard, and infidelity was one of the most despised acts. Both Ryan and Emma went pale in an instant. Emma looked as though she might burst into tears. Sarah, what are you talking about? Ryan and I are just friends. How could you accuse us of something like that? She cried out, her voice trembling. Ryan pointed at me, his voice loud and angry. Sarah, don't go too far. Apologize to Emma right now. If you don't, I swear I'll never marry a vile woman like you. I rolled my eyes so hard I almost saw the back of my head. The sheer absurdity of his words nearly made me gag. When he saw my dismissive expression, he rolled up his sleeves, clearly ready to lay hands on me again. But this time, several strong men from the crowd stepped forward, surrounding him. What do you think you're doing, Ryan? One of them growled. You think you can strut around here with your mistress and bully Sarah? You're both a disgrace. Considering your age, we're willing to let this slide. But don't push your luck. If you mess with Sarah, you're messing with all of us. The tension was palpable, and a few of the more hot-tempered villagers looked ready to drag Ryan out and give him a beating. Meanwhile, Emma was being berated by several older women, her face flushed with embarrassment as tears streamed down her cheeks. Within moments, the two of them became the laughingstock of the village, fleeing like rats, stumbling and tripping as they disappeared from sight. Once the crowd began dispersing, I thanked everyone for their support and turned to head home. Earlier, I had come out to help Ryan's mother, Linda Miller, manage their family's market stall. But after the chaos that unfolded, I decided to leave the stall behind entirely. It wasn't my responsibility. After all, if they didn't care, why should I? In my past life, even before I dropped out of school, I often helped Linda with the stall. After leaving school, I worked even harder, setting up my own stall selling handmade goods just to make ends meet. Most of the money I earned ended up being spent on Ryan's family. Linda had seen my efforts firsthand. Yet when Ryan graduated and returned home, she was the first to support breaking off our engagement. She even said I wasn't good enough for her son, calling me a toad trying to eat swan meat. Her vile expression was etched into my memory, and now, I wouldn't waste a single ounce of effort on such ungrateful people. When I walked into their house, Linda was lounging on the bed, comfortably fanned by an electric fan while eating watermelon and watching TV. Seeing me, she frowned. Why are you back in the middle of the day? Did you leave the stall? Don't tell me you made Ryan look after it. From her expression, I could tell she was worried about her precious son. Ryan had never tended to the stall in his life, not even in my past life. He always turned his nose up at it, saying it was the kind of work only village women did. Linda clicked her tongue in disapproval. Nagging. You're so lazy. Hurry back to the stall. And while you're at it, tell Ryan to come home. I have something to talk to him about. She got off the bed and gave me a push, urging me to leave. Mom, wait a minute. A voice called from the other room. Ryan's younger brother, Tyler Miller, came out, yawning. I'm starving. Tell her to make me something to eat before she goes. Linda waved him off dismissively. What could she possibly cook that's worth eating? Just go out and buy something. If you don't have money, ask her for some. Tyler didn't even bother with manners, barking at me. Hey, you, give me some cash. This family of parasites nearly made me laugh from sheer anger. In my past life, Linda and Tyler had taken full advantage of my love for Ryan, treating me like their personal servant and ATM. No matter how much I did for them, they never once showed an ounce of gratitude. They never said a single good word about me. Instead, they often lost their temper and hurled insults at me. If they faced any frustrations outside, they would come home and vent on me to feel better. In my past life, I endured it because I was blinded by love. I thought if I just put up with it for a while, happiness would come in the future. It wasn't until the very end that I realized how utterly wrong I had been. Now, I wasn't going to take their nonsense anymore. I turned to Linda Miller and said coldly, the stall is unattended right now. If you're worried about losing your goods, you should go take care of it yourself. Then I turned to Tyler Miller. I don't have food for you, and I don't have money to give you. As for the money I gave you a few days ago, return it immediately. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows about the time you stole stationery from your classmates. The two of them froze, stunned. You, what do you mean? Do you not understand? I said, my tone icy. Let me put it plainly. I no longer consider you family. You're not welcome here. Get out of my house right now. That's right. This house was mine. Ryan's family home was a rundown shack with leaking roofs, while mine was a spacious and bright courtyard house. After my parents passed away a few years ago, because of my engagement to Ryan and the close ties between our families, Linda had taken it upon herself to move into my home. She claimed she was here to help care for her future daughter-in-law and strengthen the bond between our families. In reality, their entire family had been freeloading off me ever since. They lived comfortably in the main house while I was relegated to the side room, as if I were the outsider. You've really lost all respect for your elders. Linda trembled with rage, pointing her finger at me and cursing. Fine, just you wait. From today on, don't even dream of marrying into our family. Tyler, not to be outdone, sneered. You're crazy. You deadbeat woman. Apologize to my mom right now and give me some compensation money, or this isn't over. And don't forget, if you push it too far, I'll get my brother to beat you up. They still thought they could use Ryan as leverage to manipulate me into submission, but I just smiled. Oh, didn't you hear? Ryan and I are no longer engaged. The two of them went silent, their expressions morphing into disbelief. After a moment, Linda exclaimed, Are you insane? Breaking off the engagement with Ryan? Aren't you afraid no one else will want you after this? Linda, clearly panicked, grabbed the hem of my shirt, whining. No, you can't break off the engagement. Who's going to manage the stall if you do? Ever since I got engaged to Ryan, I had been the one handling their family's market stall, watching over it, purchasing stock, and managing everything. Linda had always been lazy and self-indulgent, unwilling to let go of me, her free labor. Tyler lunged forward, gripping my pants leg tightly. You can't call it off. You have to be my sister-in-law. This, coming from the same person who had been calling me a deadbeat woman just moments ago. The way this family's true colors matched so perfectly disgusted me. I didn't bother wasting more words on them. Fine. You won't leave? Then I'll call the neighbors over and let them decide. Let's see what everyone thinks about whether you should still live in my house now that Ryan and I are no longer engaged. Realizing I was serious, Linda panicked. Fine. We'll leave, she snapped, hastily gathering their belongings while grumbling under her breath. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I'll remember this. Mark my words. I'll never let someone like you into my family. I ignored her complaints, leaning against the wall as I urged them to hurry up. Tyler grudgingly threw a piggy bank at me. This is all I've got. Count it yourself to see if it's enough. If not, I don't have more. The arrogance of it all. Truly the apple didn't fall far from the tree. I slowly bent down, picked up the piggy bank, and said with a casual smile, "No worries. If it's not enough, I'll just ask Ryan for the rest. Take care. And don't let the door hit you on your way out." Their faces turned an ugly shade of green as they stormed out in a fit of anger. After they left, I thoroughly cleaned the house, both inside and out. Soon, it looked completely refreshed. I even replaced all the locks with new ones. As for the belongings they had used, I threw them all out. There was no room for such unlucky objects in my new life. Linda Miller had left some of her things behind, perhaps thinking she might return someday, but I wasn't about to keep them around to clutter my space. I tossed those out as well. Once I finished tidying up, I borrowed a bicycle from the village chief and rode to the city. The college entrance exams were coming up soon, and I needed to focus on my studies. Getting into a good university was the only way to truly change my future. Since fate had given me this second chance, I would not squander it. After riding for over an hour, I arrived in the city and made my way to a recycling center. In my past life, this was where I had found study materials for Ryan Miller. These materials, left behind by previous students, were full of annotations and extra notes that covered various key knowledge points. When Ryan studied them, his grades improved dramatically. Even Emma Carter had benefited, as Ryan shared the materials with her, allowing her to scrape by and get into the same university as him. This time, those life-changing materials were mine. I gathered all the study guides and rode back to the village. On my way, I passed Linda's market stall and spotted Ryan and Emma sitting on a bench nearby. They were sitting close together, arms wrapped around each other, with no one else nearby to witness their behavior. They no longer bothered to hide their relationship. Emma was crying, her tears falling like raindrops. "What am I supposed to do now? How will I face anyone?" she sobbed pitifully. "Don't cry, Emma," Ryan said, patting her shoulder to comfort her. "It's fine. She'll apologize to you soon enough." "Apologize?" Emma said indignantly. "Why should she apologize? She's already broken off the engagement with you." Ryan let out a cold laugh, his tone dripping with disdain. "You're overthinking it. She's just playing hard to get, trying to manipulate me with these little tricks she's picked up from who knows where. Does she really think I'm scared of her? Just watch. I bet she'll come crawling back in less than 2 days to apologize. And when she does, you can make her pay for everything she's done. Hell, I could even make her kneel and beg for forgiveness if I wanted to." Emma smiled sweetly and kissed Ryan on the cheek. "You're the best, Ryan." That moment, Linda's voice suddenly rang out behind them. Well, Ryan, you're here sneaking around with your mistress." She threw her luggage onto the ground and stormed over, grabbing Emma by the hair and raising her hand to slap her. Linda was fuming. On the way to the village, both she and Tyler had been the subject of scornful gossip from the villagers, who whispered about her son being a freeloader and a cheater. Her face burned with humiliation. What followed was utter chaos. Ryan eventually managed to pull Linda away from the tearful Emma, who ran off sobbing, glaring at his mother. Ryan demanded, "What's with all the luggage?" Linda snorted, "What else? That so-called good fiancé of yours kicked us out of her house. We have no place to stay now and have to go back to that run-down shack you call a home." Tyler angrily kicked a rock nearby. "I don't want to go back. That place leaks and is practically uninhabitable." Ryan frowned, his expression darkening. "Sarah has gotten completely out of control. If she wants to pick a fight with me, fine. But taking it out on my family, on an old woman and a kid? That's low. She's so immature." He grabbed Linda's arm. "Come on. Let's go confront her." Linda's mood instantly brightened. "Oh, so you're just fighting? I thought the engagement was actually over." She picked up her bags, grumbling. "Carrying all this stuff is exhausting. When we see her, make sure she massages my shoulders as an apology." Just then, I leisurely rode past them on my bike. Ryan spotted me and smirked smugly. "See? We don't even need to go find her. She's already coming to us." Linda grinned, her face full of satisfaction. "Good. Make her carry all this stuff back to the house." "I'm not carrying a thing," Linda Miller snapped. Let him carry it since he's the one who got us kicked out. I didn't even glance at them as I pedaled past. Ignoring their expectant stares and smug attitudes, all three of them stood there, stunned, swallowing the words they had been so ready to hurl at me. Linda glared at Ryan and scolded. This is all your fault. If you hadn't been fooling around with that shameless woman, we wouldn't be stuck going back to that rundown house. Ryan gritted his teeth, his face dark with anger. She's doing this on purpose. Just give her a day. She'll come crawling back. She can't live without me. Just watch and see. The next morning, I woke up in my warm, comfortable room. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could enjoy a peaceful rest on my day off. There was no need to wake up early to tend a stall. No haggling over prices during restocks. After getting up, I prepared myself a hearty breakfast, indulging in foods I had been too reluctant to eat in my past life. This time around, I was living for myself and wouldn't deny myself these simple pleasures. Once I had eaten, I focused on my studies. With the materials I had gathered, I progressed quickly, absorbing knowledge as if my mind were a sponge. By the afternoon, during a short break, I decided to calculate the exact amount Ryan's family owed me. I wrote everything down in detail, ensuring there was no room for dispute. With the calculations complete, I headed toward Ryan's house. As I approached their door, I overheard Linda's voice. Aren't you skipping school? Then why are you still at home? Get out there and set up the stall already. The whole family depends on that income. Ryan's irritated voice followed. Forget the stall. Just wait. She'll show up any moment now. She's never stayed mad at me for more than a day. That's true. Tyler added confidently. Mom, just wait. She'll come crawling back soon enough. I was just about to knock when Emma's voice rang out behind me. Sarah, what a surprise to see you here, she said with a mocking smile, covering her mouth as if suppressing a laugh. Are you here to apologize? I hope I'm not in the way. I'm just here to check on Ryan. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Just then, the door opened, and Ryan stepped out. His face lit up the moment he saw me, and he threw a triumphant glance at Linda as if to say, I told you so. Linda, too, grinned widely. See? Couples don't hold grudges overnight. Go on. Make up already. Before I could speak, Ryan raised a hand to stop me. His face turned stern as he said, I'm willing to forgive you, but you'll need to agree to a few conditions. First, kneel and apologize to Emma for the way you smeared her reputation. Then, kneel before my mom and my brother to apologize for forcing them to stay in that awful house last night. Finally, drop out of school and dedicate yourself to managing the stall full-time, earning money to support my family. Do all this, and I'll let you continue being my fiancé. The smug look on his face nearly made me burst out laughing. Ryan, have you lost your mind today? I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Emma chimed in, pretending to be gracious. Sarah, you should be more polite. After all, you came here to apologize. It's only right to humble yourself and let Ryan make the decisions. I had no words for how ridiculous they sounded. With a loud slam, I placed the ledger I had prepared on the table. Listen up, I said firmly. I didn't come here to apologize. I came to collect what you owe me. Every penny you borrowed over the years is written down right here. $460 in total. Pay it back, and we'll call it even. From now on, we go our separate ways and stay out of each other's lives. Emma glanced nervously at Ryan, who had turned pale with fury. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she sobbed. Sarah, do you really have to be so heartless toward Ryan? After everything he's done for you? I interrupted her coldly. Emma, since you love Ryan so much and you've spent quite a bit of my money, surely you'll help pay it back too. Right. Emma immediately swallowed her tears, going silent and not daring to utter another word. Linda Miller stepped forward with a forced smile. Sarah, we've known each other's families for years. There's no need to make such a big deal out of this. I ignored her and continued. I know you're planning to dodge repayment, and who knows what dirty tricks you'll try. That's why I've called some of the villagers here to witness everything. It was only then that they noticed the voices coming from outside. Their faces turned all shades of red and white as they stood speechless. The villagers had surrounded their house, packed several rows deep. What's going on? One asked. I heard Ryan's family owes Sarah money and won't pay it back. Didn't their son get caught cheating on his fiancée? Now she's here to settle accounts." Another added, "This family has no shame." Someone chimed in, "I remember old Mr. Miller used to pull stunts like this too. Always up to no good until he got drunk and caused a scene that got him beaten to death." "Just pay her back," one villager urged. "We're all from the same village. Don't make this uglier than it already is." Linda was seething with anger but couldn't bring herself to lash out at Ryan. Instead, she grabbed Emma and started hitting her. "It's all your fault. You little vixen. You've ruined my entire family." Tyler Miller, embarrassed by the commotion, muttered a few curses before retreating to a back room to hide. Ryan finally seemed to realize that I wasn't here to apologize. Under the mounting pressure from the onlookers, he reluctantly rummaged through the house for some savings. When he came up short, he angrily forced Linda and Emma to hand over whatever money they had on them. Finally, with a dark expression, he turned to me and said, "Sarah, you better think this through. Once I pay you back, don't expect me to marry you ever again." I was so tired of hearing this same threat. "Your house is practically falling apart. Why would I even consider marrying into your family? Now hurry up and hand over the money." He shoved the money at me. I counted it and realized it was less than $200. "You're still missing more than half," I said. "It took all four of you this long to scrape together this little?" The villagers erupted into laughter, and Ryan's face turned beet red. "I'll give you the rest in a few days," he muttered. "Write me an IOU then," I replied. Ryan had no choice but to write the note, his hands shaking with frustration. As he handed it to me, he growled, "Sarah, you'll regret this. Mark my words." I paid him no attention, taking the IOU and leaving without a backward glance. The IOU gave him 2 months to pay the remaining amount. During those 2 months, Ryan behaved like a turtle hiding in its shell, avoiding me entirely. It was perfect. I could finally focus on my studies without his interference. During this time, I also befriended a woman named Mrs. Gu, who ran a handmade shoe business. But she wasn't just any ordinary shoemaker. In my past life, she had risen from this very village to become the queen of handmade shoes. A nationally renowned businesswoman. I used half of my savings to invest in her business as a partner. Not only that, but I also went to her shop to help with sales. With the experience from my previous life, I excelled at the work, earning endless praise from Mrs. Gu. Mrs. Gu was naturally kind-hearted, and when she learned that I had lost both of my parents and was living alone, she treated me with even more warmth. In turn, I treated her with genuine respect and affection, as if she were my own mother. Although I spent most of my time studying and working with Mrs. Gu, I still occasionally heard news about Ryan, his family, and Emma. After that fateful day, their lives had started to unravel. Their reputation was utterly ruined. Every day, people threw rotten vegetables at their house. Whenever they ventured outside, they became the subject of constant gossip. Linda Miller's stall was also vandalized. Her goods were either stolen or destroyed, leaving her with no business and no income. Whenever she was in a bad mood, she would take it out on Emma Carter, demanding that Emma pay off the debt their family owed me. Ryan, too preoccupied with his own troubles, didn't bother defending Emma. Instead, he turned a blind eye. After all, he didn't have money either, and having a scapegoat like Emma worked to his advantage. Desperate to win back Ryan's affection, Emma stole her family's savings to give to him. When her parents discovered what she had done, they beat her severely and kicked her out of the house. With nowhere else to go, she had no choice but to move in with Ryan's family. Once Ryan paid off the debt he owed me, I cut ties with him completely. Whatever happened to them after that was no longer my concern. Meanwhile, Mrs. Gu's business flourished. She opened several new branches in both the town and the city, and I began receiving substantial dividends every month as her partner. As the college entrance exams approached, Mrs. Gu insisted that I focus solely on my studies and stopped me from coming to the store, though my share of the profits remained unchanged. She even encouraged me to spend some money on myself, advising me to buy nice clothes and treat myself well. Compared to Linda Miller, who had tried to force me to quit school and work to support her family while constantly demanding money from me, Mrs. Gu's kindness moved me to tears. Following her advice, I went to the city, bought myself several beautiful outfits, and indulged in foods I had never allowed myself to eat in my past life. Soon after, I made a new friend who eventually became my closest confidant. Her parents, both teachers, often gave us free tutoring sessions, helping me improve my grades even further. Time passed quickly, and the college entrance exams finally arrived. Thanks to my thorough preparation, I performed exceptionally well. My friend also did great, and it seemed likely that we would both be admitted to the prestigious university we had been aiming for. As for Ryan and Emma, this life was nothing like the last one. Without the study materials I had provided or the money I had earned for them, their days were filled with hunger and struggle. Starving and without proper resources, they couldn't even focus on studying. In the end, they didn't show up for the college entrance exams at all. When the exam results were announced, I learned that I had been accepted into my dream university. The news spread quickly throughout the village, and the villagers came to congratulate me. Among the visitors were Ryan, Linda, and Tyler. They were dressed in tattered clothes, thin and frail, looking like beggars. Their arrogance from before was completely gone. I frowned as they approached. "What are you doing here?" "Sarah, I know I was wrong," Ryan said, his face full of pleading. His once proud demeanor had crumbled into utter humility. "I made a mistake. Please, can we make up? Let's start over." "Okay, I'll treat you right this time," Linda chimed in, her voice ingratiating. "Sarah, just get back together with Ryan. I'll support you going to college." "All right." I didn't hold back my disdain. "And who exactly are you to me? I got into college on my own merit. Why would I need your permission to attend?" Ryan clenched his fists tightly, but he maintained a flattering smile. "Sarah, I'll work hard to provide for you. You can go to school without worrying. Okay, I know college is expensive, and life will be hard for you without help." "Who said she would struggle financially?" a firm voice interrupted. I turned to see Mrs. Gu walking toward me in a sharp suit, exuding confidence and authority. Today was the grand opening of one of her new stores, and she had come straight from the event to congratulate me. Smiling warmly, she handed me a large gift box. "Sarah, congratulations on achieving your dream," she said with genuine affection. Ryan, Linda, and Tyler stared at her, dumbfounded. It took them a moment to realize who she was. "Isn't that the famous businesswoman everyone's been talking about recently?" Linda whispered in shock. Ryan, unable to control his emotions, pointed at me and began yelling, "You sly woman! How did you manage to get close to someone like her without us knowing?" Mrs. Gu shot him a cold glare. "You are not welcome here. Leave immediately." Before Ryan could protest, several tall and burly bodyguards stepped forward and forced him and his family away. That night, a strong smell of smoke wafted through the air outside my window, followed by the sight of roaring flames climbing into the sky. My house was on fire. Outside, Ryan and Emma stood with torches in their hands, their faces twisted with hatred and cruelty. "Let's see you be smug now," Ryan shouted. "Let's see you go to college now. You think you're better than us? Let's burn it all down and ruin you completely. Ha ha ha." The firelight illuminated their sinister smiles as smoke billowed into the night sky. They had just started to leave, thinking they'd gotten away with their crime, when they were stopped in their tracks. A group of police officers stood before them, their expressions cold and unyielding. Behind them were the village chief and several villagers holding buckets, ready to put out the fire. The lead officer spoke. "Ryan Miller, Emma Carter, you are under arrest for arson." "What? That's impossible," Ryan stammered, stumbling back a step. "How did you know? Why are there so many people here?" I stepped out from behind the crowd, my presence answering his question. When Emma saw me, she pointed a trembling finger in my direction. "It was her. She set us up." I smirked. "You're absolutely right. It was me." I had known about their plan ahead of time and deliberately stayed away from my house that night. Instead, I gathered enough witnesses and authorities to catch them red-handed. Realizing what had happened, Ryan erupted in a string of curses. "You venomous woman!" he shouted as the officers handcuffed him and Emma, dragging them away. The villagers quickly extinguished the fire. Aside from some scorched walls, the damage was minimal. Ryan and Emma would be responsible for compensating me for the losses, a debt so large that they would never be able to repay it in their lifetimes. Both of them were sentenced to prison in a dilapidated facility outside the town. There, they were bullied relentlessly by other inmates. It wasn't long before news came that they had both died in custody. Linda Miller showed up at my house, wailing and cursing me as a bringer of misfortune, demanding that I pay for her son's suffering. She waited from morning until night, but I never showed up. That was because I was already on a train to the big city with my best friend and Mrs. Gu. I had sold the house to someone else and left the village behind entirely. As the train rumbled forward, the morning sun rose slowly over the horizon. I gazed out the window at the swiftly retreating scenery, my heart filled with hope and anticipation for the future. Life stretched endlessly ahead, brimming with possibilities. And with that, today's story comes to an end. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Feel free to share your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. See you in the next video.